I pray? Yeah, I do pray.
No, I never pray. Sometimes with my granny because she believes.
I do pray.
Yeah, I pray every night before I go to sleep.
I talk to myself a lot.
I've prayed before, I pray every now and then.
When I was a child, I prayed, yes.
When I pray, I just feel totally at ease and calm, to be honest with you.
Because my school, we had assembly and they made us sit there and pray.
No, I've never prayed to a higher being or something more powerful than me.
I prayed, I guess, because I was younger, just for God to keep watch over my family.
Maybe before an exam if I'm nervous, stuff like that.
I prayed for people to get better. I prayed for success in my life. That sounds a bit greedy.
I pray for the people that I love. I pray for things that I want to happen.
I've prayed that I could find my remote control. That always worked.
If something really bad happens, you'll see me on my knees.
Tonight we are looking at prayer, which can be a bit of a funny thing sometimes. Sometimes I feel like it's a bit like talking to Siri on my iPhone, with the difference that Siri actually answers back sometimes. And one night I was feeling quite lonely and I decided to pray to Siri on my iPhone. And this is what I said. Siri, I called him by name, I'm feeling lonely. And he said, I'm sorry to hear that, you can always talk to me. That's good. And I said, that doesn't help, can you tell me something real? And he said, let me think about that. Sorry, I couldn't do it, could you try it again? And praying to Siri doesn't help, in case you're wondering. I don't know what your experience of faith or religion or prayer or any of that stuff is. My experience of religion went something like this. My grandfather was one of the founders of the church that I was sent to my whole life. And it was set up because all other churches were unacceptable. And of course, because he was family, it was seeped into my home life as well, so there was no escape. It was on all sides. And what I picked up from this religion was that God is wrath, and he is very angry. And I have an enormous responsibility to appease him, or he will do never-ending, cruel and torturous things to me. It's a lot of pressure. I also picked up that church is not a place for honesty or being real. It's a place where you put on your very best face and show everyone that you're perfect, including God. There is a lot of striving to be perfect, because obviously you're not. And by the time I was 12, I had depression, and I was self-harming, and I was suicidal. After a while, when I got older, I started to suspect that God was not quite as he had been portrayed to me. I suspected that he was actually good. And so I started to read books. I love books. And I started to read books by people who also thought he was good, books that tugged my soul. But because psychology and spirituality are so closely linked, and I had years of religion-related trauma and indoctrination, I ended up with two voices in my head. One of the voice of the religion that screamed at me and raged at me, and the other was the voice of this good God who whispered and breathed love into my lungs. But I couldn't tell which one was real. And so I prayed a prayer that went like this: take it all away, even the love. I don't know what's real, and I need to start again. And for the next several years, I was in the desert. And I went right back to the beginning of, do I even think there is a God? And for a few years, I answered that question as a no. There is no God. There is no proof. But then after a few years, I kept having that tug that there was something more. There was more to this. And I kept searching and I kept pushing, but I still couldn't feel God. And I started reading even more books, which is kind of my routine. And I wanted God to show me that he was real. I wanted him to do something, to show me a sign that I could point to and say, that is why I believe in God, that is why. But there was nothing, and I started to pray fervently for the first time in years. Show me something, give me a sign, show me you're real. And it felt like the prayers just bounced off the ceiling, like I was talking to myself. Bertrand Russell said this, I heard this recently, it's incredible. We stand on the shore of an ocean, crying to the night and the emptiness. Sometimes a voice answers out of the darkness, but it is a voice of one drowning, and in a moment the silence returns. Sometimes it felt like that there was no one out there except other strugglers maybe, but I kept pushing and searching, and I also had this deep peace that God, if he existed, was very happy with the questions and the searching, that he wanted it. He wanted me to search. And I started screaming these angry prayers at him, and I was very honest. And one day I was reading a book which is called God on Mute, which is in the recommended reading. And something kind of shifted in me as I was reading it. I kind of describe it was nearly like a moment descended in the room. It's like when silence is so loud that the blood rushes in your ears, you can hear it. And I don't know if it was just that what I read convinced me, or I had some sort of faith burst, or God actually did something in the room, but whatever it was, in that moment, I became utterly convinced that God was not only real, but he was love and compassion, and he had somehow been with me in the desert the entire time. And nothing physical happened, but something shifted in me, and that point was the end of that period of time for me and the beginning of the next. And prayer is central to this faith because relationship with God is the heart of the Christian faith, and communication is vital to any relationship. And so that's why prayer is vital. And it's this idea that there's this powerful being of the universe. And somehow, I don't really know how it works, but somehow because of Jesus, we have this relationship with him where he's like a loving father to us. And the word that's used elsewhere in the New Testament is very similar to our word for daddy. So it's this very close, intimate relationship that we have with God. And in Ephesians, Paul writes, through Jesus, we all have access to the Father by one Spirit. And that Spirit is God's Spirit, the Holy Spirit, and it connects with our spirit. It's the deepest level of connection, spirit to spirit. And we have that. And when you pray, you can experience God's peace or his love, his joy. In Philippians, Paul says, don't be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will keep your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. So you can come to him with your anxieties, and you can also experience peace when you do that. And you can pray anywhere. You don't have to pick a special place if you don't want. You can pray out loud, you can pray in your head, you can write it down. You can pray alone, or you can pray with others, which is sometimes a little bit weird, praying out loud in front of other people. Sometimes it's a bit irritating, to be honest. But it can also be really beautiful. Like, I've had incredible times praying with other people, where I've gone to my friends and said, I'm really sad, and they've put their arms around me and prayed for peace, and I felt really soothed. I remember one night I woke up in the middle of the night and I could hear my other half praying very softly for me. And he was praying the words of Psalm 23, which is that whole thing, the Lord's my shepherd, the valley of death. And it's basically talking about when you're in darkness and you can't find rest, that God would take your hand and walk you through it. It's beautiful. Some of my best friends are here, and they prayed for me before I got on here, and I feel like they're standing up here beside me. It's this beautiful thing. It's like prayer is oxygen somehow. And God does also actually answer prayer, and I'm quite cynical, so I tend to spot the holes in it. But he does. I mean, I know in my family, we didn't have much money, and we would pray, and somehow there'd be money in the letterbox, or someone gave us a holiday. And I know in my extended family, they felt a real urge to help people in need, but they didn't have the facilities for it. And people gave them houses, that's right, plural, houses. It's incredible. And I don't know how it works. And sometimes I've seen little non-physical prayers, like in writing these talks, I tend to pray a lot about it. And I feel like this rushing when I write, like something is pouring from my spirit that's bigger than me. I don't know. And there's all sorts of suggestions in your little red books on your desks about how to pray, about how to structure your prayers, if you like that sort of thing. And there's one that's an acronym of ACTS, A-C-T-S. And the first one is adoration, which is just saying what you like about God. Then confession, which is saying sorry. Thanksgiving, and then supplication, which is asking for things. And then, of course, there's the prayer that Jesus taught his disciples, which is this incredibly moving prayer. that starts with Our Father in Heaven, which is, I guess, reminding us that God's not an ogre, that he loves us. And then it says, hallowed be your name, which is just saying how beautiful you think God is and asking that his name would be honored in your life. Your kingdom comes. So when it talks about God's kingdom, that's basically the way that God would love things to be. It's where things like money and power aren't important. It's where love reigns, where we don't hurt ourselves and we don't hurt other people. Give us this day our daily bread is maybe looking at your day that's coming up and asking God to be involved in whatever you're involved in, and maybe asking if you've got needs. And forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors is this beautiful circle of forgiveness where we ask forgiveness for when we hurt ourselves or hurt other people, but we also ask God to help us forgive others when they've hurt us and not to hold grudges. And the last bit of that is lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And God doesn't tempt us, but I guess we're asking him to help us not to be too exposed to our weak side. And we can also pray for protection against evil, which I think we're going to look at in a few weeks. So that's the structure prayers, but I want to tell you a bit about the types of prayers that I've prayed. And luckily for you, I have kept journals since I was 8 years old, and I have some genuine extracts to show you. And this first one is from when I was 16, and it's what I call a should prayer. It's the sort of prayer you're told you should pray. And it's even the writing is neat. I never write that neat. And it's full of these weird Christian phrases that if said in any other context would be horrific, but we say them as if it's perfectly normal. Things like, set me on fire, use me. Can you imagine going up to someone saying, use me, please? Touch me. What? These next two are real spontaneous prayers, and they've got no structure, and I wrote them when I was in the middle of the desert when I really wanted a sign, and I did a mixture of talking about God and also talking to God. And this first one says, I wish with all my heart that God would send an angel to me, as you do, to tell me that he is real and that there is beauty still. Please, God. This last one was supposed to be showing you how real prayer can get, but apparently it's too real for an alpha dog. And I knew I wouldn't be able to say it, but I thought I could at least put it on a picture on the screen, but unfortunately the censorship brigade got to it. I tried to sneak it in there. And it's supposed to tell you that I let it all out, basically. I was honest with God. I didn't hold back. And he was big enough to handle it, even if people aren't. And just go for it, you know? Just let loose in your prayers. He already knows you think it, so you may as well just say it. And just throw yourself with wild abandon into prayer. You know, that blurred out 4-letter word, that's honest, and he can handle it. There's a film called The Grey that's got Liam Neeson in it. And he is alone in life. He has suffered, he's angry, and he's searching. And I'm sorry, there's a spoiler alert, but near the end of the film, it looks like he's about to die. Although to be fair, it looks like he's about to die throughout the whole film, but particularly at the end. And he's desperate, and he's fighting to survive, and he prays this epic prayer, which, again, I'll have to change considerably because of the language. But here it is. It says, do something, you faulty prat, fraudulent mother puncher. Do something. Screw faith, earn it. Show me something real. I need it now, not later. Do something. And I'll believe in you until the day I die, I swear. I'm calling on you, I'm calling on you. And when the sky does not respond, he pauses and says to himself, screw it, I'll do it myself. And while everyone else is freaking out at the suggestion of the language, I'm looking at you, the person who's not at all shocked by that prayer, because you're very familiar with it. You have prayed similar prayers over and over again, and you are feeling hopeless because the sky is silent. It's silent. But I know he's not shocked by that prayer. I know he wants honesty, and I bet he'd rather have you screaming that honest prayer than any of the righteous, pious ones. Jesus actually talked about that, about how it's better to pray a simple, honest prayer than a self-righteous, eloquent one. Just be honest, he can handle it. To pray honest prayers is incredibly difficult because you have to be honest. It's very difficult to do that. And for some of us, to be honest and admit that we have doubts would mean that our entire identities would crumble. I've also prayed other types of prayers. I've prayed prayers where all I can do is lie on the floor curled up in a ball weeping, and I can't even say a word or think a word, and it's nearly as if my tears are my prayers. And there's this bit in the Psalms, a beautiful line that talks about it's as if God catches each of our tears in a jar, almost like words on paper, like each tear is a word. And there's another bit in the New Testament where it talks about how God hears even a groan or a cry as words. It's beautiful. Sometimes I've prayed prayers that are just the same line over and over again. I've chanted it for weeks, sometimes months on end is all I can say. Different ones I've used "Don't Leave Me Here Alone," which is a line from a U2 song, and I'm basically saying, I'm a mess, I need you, don't leave me here alone. Sometimes I say, "Deliver us from evil," which is from the Lord's Prayer, and I say that when I feel darkness or trauma. Sometimes I say, when I can't sleep, I say a bit from the Psalms, which is, "I will lie down and sleep in peace, for you alone make me dwell in safety." And sometimes I say entire liturgies from the Book of Common Prayer, and I feel peaceful because these words have been so carefully written over hundreds of years. And someone in India at this very moment might be saying the same thing, or someone 200 years ago might have sat in their bed saying the same thing. And it's this connection of people who are all praying. Sometimes my prayers are just listening to music. I say nothing and just my soul prays with whatever I'm listening to. I tend to have one song going at any one time that reflects what I'm feeling. And for about 4 months, quite recently, it was Pink Floyd's The Final Cut that I could only listen to. And I was basically just praying along with it, with the words. About 4 months ago, I discovered the oratory next door. And my soul finds solace there. I'm the type of person that noise grates me, and church often seems to be designed for extroverts. And as an introvert, I often find it quite an irritating place. If noise and music and smoothies nourishes your soul, then please go all out. It's all good. Get nourished, be happy. But my voice speaks for the ones who don't often get nourished by that. I like contemplation and reading and silence. And I have so much respect for the Catholic Church that lets me just go in there and just be, just lets me do what I need to do. And they've really got the contemplation thing down. And I just don't imagine that you'll ever go to Jesus with your anguish and hear him say, "Dry your eyes, mate," or "Man up." There's this story in the New Testament that talks about a woman who was crying on the floor at the feet of Jesus. And that would have been so awkward. And of course, they rushed to her to get her to stop crying and stop doing this weird thing. And Jesus just said, "No, this is love." And I think she was praying because he answered her. He said, "You're forgiven." She didn't say a word. She didn't say the sinner's prayer, acknowledge the creed. She just cried, and he heard her prayer, and he answered her. He is so beautiful, this Jesus. He is so unlike religion. And his disciples asked him to teach them to pray because something he was doing was different to what they saw in religion. And the religious leaders criticized him for letting her pray like that, for letting her cry and touch him. And he just told them a very clever story and then turned to her and spoke to her as if she was the only person in the room. Do you know what he does for you who loathes religion? He turns to you as if you're the only person in the room. He swats at religion like it's a pesky fly and answers the cry of your heart that you can't even put into words, the cry for something that you desperately want from him. But let's be honest, the thing that is so difficult about prayer is that you can't see God. Most of the time you just kind of sense things, and sometimes you hear people say, "Oh, I had a marvelous conversation with God this morning." I think, really? You're nuts. Because most of the time you just sense things. And recently I was really feeling the strain of that, of not having anything back. I really wanted to feel something. And so I decided to go to confession in a Catholic church. But the problem, it turns out, is that you have to actually be a Catholic to go to confession in a Catholic church. And so I Googled how to become a Catholic, thinking I could just sign a form or something. But it's like this whole big process, and there's lots of people involved, and it takes a really long time. And I was feeling really desperate. I really wanted to have that ritual. So recently what I've been trying to do is imagine Jesus when I pray. I don't know if it helps you, but it helps me, because what I read about him suggests that he might have been a carpenter sort who was working on something, and he seemed to just let people say what they needed to say, and then he'd ask them these questions that sear their heart. And he looked at people with compassion, and it helps me to picture that when I pray. I don't know if it helps, but it helps me. I told you before that what I learned from religion is that God is repulsed by my humanity. And I think that sometimes when we go to him, like in prayer, we're just so conscious of our mess. And I think sometimes we can feel great shame, especially if we've messed up, if we've done something. And I was on a train recently, and a group of girls got on who were about my age, and we were all crammed in the standing bit of the train. And at one point during the journey, one of the girls collapsed unconscious on the floor. She might have had epilepsy or something. And when she was unconscious, she actually peed herself. And trains have like these ridged floors. And I remember seeing her pee trickle through the ridges across the floor, so everyone was standing on it. And there was a man in his 40s who was not part of their group. And he went over to her and he sat down in the floor in her pee. And he put his arms around her and he pulled her against him so her head was resting on his chest. And like her clothes that were covered in pee, he just had them against her. And he just sat there with his arms around her. And when she came around, she didn't even try to get away in embarrassment, because he was just so cool about it. He was just so normal. And she just lay there in his arms as he held her. And I've never seen anything like it, but I think that God does that for us. I think when we come to him with our mess and our shame and our humiliation, he steps into it in his bare feet and just holds us regardless. Sometimes God doesn't answer prayer in the way we want, or not at all. And that might be for good reason. Maybe it's because it wouldn't be good for us or someone else at some point. To be honest, if God had answered all the prayers for boys I wanted to like me, right now I'd probably be barefoot and pregnant, living in a farm in Ireland with some narrow-minded, chauvinistic lunatic. But sometimes he genuinely doesn't answer things and we just can't see why. Sorry, I'm trying to get serious, stop laughing. Okay, so sometimes he doesn't answer things, and we just don't understand why. And unanswered prayer is a painful thing. God's silence is a very painful thing. And what that issue actually comes down to is this even bigger issue of suffering. Why does God not stop things when we ask? Why does he not do something when we pray? And I don't know. I have no idea. And we speculate, we pretend to know the motives of this beautiful being. And while someone over here gushes about God providing a parking space at the supermarket, someone over here is clutching a dead loved one, having prayed fervently that they'd live. Explain that. And I don't even want to try and speculate, because there's so many people in the world that have experienced horrors, and they're sick of it being brushed away with some cliched bumper sticker or some pithy little answer. I don't know. I don't know why he doesn't answer sometimes. I have no theory on suffering. There's plenty of that in the bookshop downstairs if you want to read about it. I have nothing to add. But I love stories, and I'd really like to read you one. In the Narnia books, Diggory is a little boy whose mother is dying, and he meets Aslan, the lion who created Narnia and has powers. And Diggory hoped that he would find something in Narnia that would cure his mother, but time is running out. And C.S. Lewis writes, he thought of his mother. He thought of the great hopes he had had and how they were all dying away. And a lump came in his throat and tears in his eyes, and he blurted out, please, won't you, can't you give me something that will cure Mother? Up till then, he'd been looking at the lion's great feet and the huge claws on them. Now, in his despair, he looked up at his face, for the tawny face was bent down near his own. And wonder of wonders, great shining tears stood in the lion's eyes. They were such big, bright tears compared with Diggory's own, that for a moment he felt as if the lion must really be sorrier about his mother than he was himself. My son, Aslan said. I know. Grief is great. I feel that from God. I feel his tears over me. I don't know why he doesn't answer some prayers. I don't know why that terrible thing happened to you. I don't know why I've had to go through what I have. But I know his great face is bent towards me. He is close, so close. And his tears are bigger than mine, and his pain over my hurts is greater than mine. And sometimes that's enough. It's not always, but sometimes it is. And tomorrow I'll probably scream, why, you big freak? But for now, just the second, he's love and he's here. And God is a mystery, and I fully embrace that. And I hope I never decide I've made it and I know everything until I see him face to face. And tonight I've told you about lots of different prayers I've prayed, and I hope it's helped you, because I think sometimes all we really want is someone to stand up in church and say, me too. Instead of solutions or reprimands, just me too. I know. You're not alone. I don't know where you are at this moment in time. Maybe you feel like you're in the desert and it's sparse and lifeless. Maybe you feel like you're in a lush green field and you can sense God on every blade of grass that moves in the wind. But I refuse to gloss over the harsh realities of existence in the name of religion or to sell you something. But look, I'm still here. I have every reason in the world to run away from this thing. But there is something that keeps tugging my soul. There is something in this faith. I think it's the most beautiful thing in the world. It redeems everything. And it's very dark sometimes, but there is hope. Just look at this beautiful God who lives and breathes love. The only way to know if God is who he says he is to reach out to him. Finding God, ultimately what it comes down to is just make a move. Just start with one prayer, one honest prayer, one line, one word even, one tear, and just start walking. And I really believe this. He is near, and his arms are open, and he is moving towards you. Thank you.